Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. A lot coming up for you this hour. A little bit later on in the hour, we're going to be joined by Henry Olsen. He's a Washington Post columnist. He'll be stopping by to discuss the big problem with the media's focus on the Amazon. What are the solutions to fires in the Amazon? It turns out they don't actually want to discuss those. We'll also be joined by Monica Klein. She's a former Planned Parenthood-trained sexual health education instructor who quit Planned Parenthood when she realized just how much damage Planned Parenthood was doing in the realm of sex ed. We'll be discussing with her in just a little while. First, it is amazing how there's so many folks on the left who don't even understand that they are part of the problem. So I've been saying for years on this program, literally going all the way back, way before President Trump, that the worst thing that folks on the left tend to do is they tend to suggest that everyone who disagrees with them is their moral inferior. Everybody who disagrees with them is racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. I've suggested that sort of character attack without evidence is a form of bullying. And it's ugly and it's bad. And it causes people to react exactly as you would expect them to react if they're attacked that way, which is they're going to embrace whoever punches back. And that's how you got Trump. My suggestion has been that the left is continuously shutting down conversations, trying to prevent the conversations from even taking place, suggesting that if you have a conversation with, for example, me, or if you have a conversation with Jordan Peterson, or if you have a conversation with Joe Rogan, or if you have a conversation with anybody who is not hardcore on the left, well, that means that you are bad. And we must prevent that at all available costs. And the left will go out of its way to harm people for having conversations with people on the other side. They will rip into them. We've had this experience routinely here at the Ben Shapiro Show. We do something called the Ben Shapiro Sunday Special. And one of the things we are constantly fighting against is the reality of the situation in which we invite somebody who's on the left and they want to come on. And then they acknowledge full scale that the reason that they will not do so is they are afraid of the blowback from their own side. We get this all the time. And a few brave souls have done it. And here's the thing. When they just tell everybody, sit down, shut up, who cares what you have to say? It's a conversation. Deal with it. Everything's fine. In this realm, I credit my friend Larry Wilmore. So Larry Wilmore is a comedian. He was on Comedy Central. I disagree with him about a lot politically. Larry Wilmore came and did the Sunday Special. And I warned him 4 times before he came here, that if he did, he'd get blowback. He did get blowback, and he basically said, whatever, man. We sat down, we had a conversation. I did his podcast too. It was fine. But there are lots of people on the left whose job it is to make anyone miserable for having a conversation. If you have a conversation, everything becomes miserable. The most obvious example that's happened to me, and this happens to me really, really regularly, but the most obvious example is this independent writer, producer, director named Mark Duplass. So Mark Duplass had the temerity to come have a private conversation with me about gun control because he wanted to do a movie about the Second Amendment. He wanted the pro-Second Amendment position so that his movie would not be caricaturing the right wing. So I gave him like an hour and a half of time, and we sat and we discussed. And I said to him as he was leaving, dude, for your own survival, I do not recommend that you say you have been here because your own side will kill you. And he got a little frisky one day, about 3 weeks later, and decided to tweet out that I was a nice guy and that people might want to give my show a listen. He was hit so hard by the left for even having a conversation with me that he deleted the tweet saying I was a nice guy and then replaced it with the tweet saying he did not hold with racism, sexism, bigotry, and homophobia. So the goal of the hardcore left is to stop conversations, not with white supremacists, with normal conservatives, with normal mainstream conservatives. That is a goal. And if I point this out, if I point out that makes the country worse, it makes it impossible for us to bridge political divides. It makes it impossible for us to unify on questions that dictate unity. The response among many on the left is, well, of course you'd be saying that. You're a Nazi. Now, I'm not making that up. That was on the editorial page of the Washington Post yesterday. So yesterday must have been my media birthday or something, because there were 2 editorials in the Washington Post attacking me personally. The most ridiculous one was one from a person named Eve Fairbanks called The Reasonable Rebels. And it is illustrated with a cartoon of a Confederate soldier, looks like a Confederate captain or something, sitting behind a laptop with a Confederate flag on it, with the stars and bars on it. Because that's people like me, people on the right, who want to have conversations with people on the left, who just want to discuss things. Those people are actually neo-Confederates. It says, conservatives say we've abandoned reason and civility. The Old South used the same language to defend slavery. Now, this is the purest form of an illogical attack maybe I've ever seen. So just to follow this, yeah, I mean, you can literally replace the adjectives and the nouns here and show how stupid this is. Hitler used to have a dog. You have a dog. You must be like Hitler. Right? You today, you love animals. You know who else loved animals? You know who else loved animals? Hitler loved animals. Satsu. Okay, that's this logic. And the article, the entire article is this. Right? The entire article is, I call for reason and civility and conversations. Just like a slave owner would do. Okay, a few things about that. First of all, if I'm going to list the things that slave owners did wrong, calling for civility in conversation, that would be like not on the list. Pretty high on the list would be the enslavement of other humans. You know, like whipping them and owning them and separating their families and killing them occasionally and raping them fairly regularly. Like that would probably be high on the list. Also on the list for slaveholders would be launching a war on the Union that resulted in the death of 600,000 Americans. Like that would be on the list. Them saying, why don't we have a conversation? That one doesn't really rank on the list of sins. It turns out that everyone throughout history may have called for civility. The real question as to whether they are civil is not whether they are calling for civility. It's whether they are currently holding slaves, for example. I'm sorry. The great sin of slaveholders was not, let's have a conversation. It was also, here's the girl I'm raping out back because I own her. Like that was that right there. That was the sin. I'm going to go with that. Just putting that out there. So Eve Fairbanks, being an idiot, wrote, quote, after the El Paso shooting, Ben Shapiro, a popular conservative podcaster, yes, we are, asked Americans to draw a line between the few conservatives who are white supremacists and those who, like him, aren't. First, just missing the point right away, white supremacists are not conservative. White supremacists do not believe in individual rights. White supremacists believe in judging people as a group. They do not believe that every person is made in the image of God. They do not believe that America is a creedal nation, not a racial nation. So they're not conservative. But beyond that, she says, almost all Americans are on the same side, Shapiro said, and we should be mourning together. In his telling, we aren't, for one simple reason. Too many on the political left are castigating the character of those who disagree, lumping conservatives and political nonconformists together with racists and xenophobes. Right, that is a fair statement of my position. So her solution to this, my complaint is, we can't get together because you keep saying that conservatives and political nonconformists are evil. And her response is, but aren't you though? Saying, oh, so you want to prove my point now? My whole point is, I'd love to agree with you on stuff because I feel like we sort of agree on the white supremacists are a bad thing. In fact, I agree with you so strongly that I have 24/7 security to protect me from white supremacists. In fact, my opposition to white supremacists has cost me a lot more in time, money, and aggravation than Eve Fairbanks has, for sure. But if I say, like, you know, when you lump good people in with white supremacists, you're alienating good people and making it harder to have a conversation, her answer is, I feel like that's unjustified because you're a Nazi. So you're literally making my point. So she says, I grew up in a conservative family. The people I talk to most frequently, the people I call when I need help, are conservative. I'm not inclined to paint conservatives as thoughtless bigots. But you are. But a few years ago, listening to the voices and arguments of commentators like Shapiro, I began to feel a very specific deja vu I couldn't initially identify. It felt as if the arguments I was reading were eerily familiar. And then she talks about all of the various figures who keep calling for reason and civility. Jordan Peterson and Amy Wax and Jonathan Haidt and Barry Weiss and Christina Hoff Sommers and Sam Harris. What was she reminded of? She was reminded of antebellum rhetoric in the slave-owning South. So let's just get this straight. What reminded her of antebellum rhetoric in the slave-owning South was not judging people based on race. It was me saying we should all be unified against those people, and you probably shouldn't lump conservatives in with those people. That reminded her of the slave-owning South, where, lest we forget, they held slaves, which made it the slave-owning South. You always know that somebody's saying something absurd when they say something like this. If that sounds absurd, she says this in the article, she says, if that sounds absurd, Shapiro and his compatriots aren't defending slavery after all. It may be because many Americans are unfamiliar with the South's actual rhetoric. Oh, really? Oh, really? Unfamiliar with the South's actual rhetoric? Yes, I'm sure that's it. Because the point that the South was trying to make is we should have a reasonable conversation. Well, a senator was caning another senator on the floor of the Senate. While a civil war was being fought, while millions were being held in chains, the real message of the South was civility. This is an actual article in a major newspaper. They stressed the importance of logic, facts, truth, science, and nature much more than Northern rhetoricians did. This, by the way, shows that logic, facts, truth, science, and nature are all bad. If you cite any of these, you are just a slaveholder, obviously. They loved hyperbole. You know, they really, like, the slaveholders, they loved hyperbole. And that's how you know if somebody uses hyperbole, they're a slaveholder. Like this lady, who is equating conservatives with slaveholders. That's hyperbole. So she's a slaveholder by her own logic. She says, let's call this particular logic antebellum reasoning. Its appeal was that it identified pro-South rhetoricians as the upholders of America's true heritage. They were, in their own reckoning, dedicated to truth and persecuted by tyrants. Okay, literally everyone in political history has believed that they are dedicated to truth and persecuted by tyrants. Like pretty much everyone, including this lady. But doesn't matter. If you call for reasonableness, then you are obviously pro-slavery. You're just like a slaveholder. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. She says that we should be asking questions of the reasonable right. I know what they say they worry about, but I don't know what they want. A recent Vanity Fair profile of Weiss began with everything she's been accused of being: alt-righter, fascist, the provocateur the left loves to hate. There's no evidence that Weiss is widely hated except by a subsection of Twitter. She's a New York Times opinion writer. She appears regularly on Bill Maher's HBO talk show. But if she's not defined by being hated, then what is she? Ooh, what is she? By the way, I know Barry. Barry's going to hate that I say this. It's not going to help her with her friends. I'm friends with Barry. Okay, I consider her a friend. Okay, Barry gets ripped on repeatedly by people on both sides of the aisle all the damn time. If you think that her appearing on Bill Maher is the extent of the crap she takes, you are dead wrong. And this is true for all the people that are mentioned. But again, if you call for an open conversation about stuff, this is because secretly you believe evil. Evil. She says, if someone says liberals have become illiberal, you should consider whether it's true. But you should also know that this assertion has a long history, and that George Wallace and Barry Goldwater used it in their eras to powerful effect. First of all, equating George Wallace with Barry Goldwater is an intellectual betrayal of high order. Just people who make this claim aren't renegades. They're heirs to an extremely specific tradition in American political rhetoric, one that has become it's dangerous. If I call for a conversation, super dangerous. How dare I call for conversations about public issues like it's a republic or something? How dare I say that the First Amendment is important? Obviously, if I say that it's illiberal to send people to my speeches to attack people, and that it's bad that I need police officers to escort me to and from campus, it's because I am evil. Yeah, guys, this is how you got Trump, and this is how you're going to get more Trump, so continue on this path if you want more Trump. If you want more Trump, right through this doorway. Enjoy. Well, Planned Parenthood receives millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer funding every year, or at least they did until very recently when the Trump administration changed some of the rules with regard to receiving taxpayer funding. That rule change under Title X basically suggested that they would not give money to any organization that did not segregate its abortion business from the rest of its business. Planned Parenthood declined to do so, and thus they gave up some $60 million in federal funding. Joining us on the line to talk about what it is that Planned Parenthood does on a day-to-day basis is Monica Klein. She's a former Planned Parenthood-trained sexual health education instructor. She collaborated with the nonprofit for 10 years and worked with their Title X program. Monica, thanks so much for joining the Ben Shapiro Show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ben.
So why don't we talk for a second about what exactly Planned Parenthood does? I think the broad, widespread perception is that Planned Parenthood is just a place for abortion, but they also do a fair bit of sex education, particularly in public schools. What exactly is their role in that area?
Right. Well, part of their Title X services is prevention education. So sex education is one vehicle to educate the public on prevention of STIs and HIV infection. So it's all part of a Healthy People initiative. Of course, Title X also has statutes and regulations, like Regulation 1008 is one of several regulations, and it's the prohibition of abortion. So none of the funds appropriated under Title X shall be used in programs where abortion is a method of family planning. So what we see is that Planned Parenthood, or really this administration, is doing what Americans have been asking, which is accountability on our tax monies and how they're spent. So nothing has actually changed. Title X is simply holding all Title X clinics accountable for how they spend their funding. And the only squeaky wheel is Planned Parenthood because you see family planning does not consider abortion as a pregnancy option. Title X's goal is for healthy families, healthy moms, healthy babies. Planned Parenthood is upset because they know that they're misusing Title X funds. And Title X is their largest sales tool for abortion. And if they can't use Title X to promote abortion, then they don't want to waste their time with it. They just want to let it go. But they don't want people to believe that. They want them to think it's unjust.
Monica, you're a former Planned Parenthood trained sexual health education instructor, so you know their sex ed program. What exactly is the content of that sex ed program, and is it really helpful to kids or harmful to kids?
Well, I have found that it's incredibly harmful to kids. At first it's really, it's supposed to be just like public health education, how to educate people on how STIs and HIV are spread and the prevention of that by using condoms. But Planned Parenthood and other risk reduction curriculums, what they do is that they really put their own little spice into it. So basically, what I was taught is when you walk into a room full of young people or even adults, assume that they've done anything and everything under the sun when it comes to sexuality and sex, and that really the educator's goal is to teach them how to do those sex acts in a safer way by using condoms. And because they know condoms are not going to be 100% effective, they then refer them and recommend that they get tested and treated, and of course also refer for abortions. And so what's happening is our young people who are getting into puberty are basically being told through risk reduction education that anything and everything is open to them. It's really an expectation. There's actually some polls that were done that kids who've been through this kind of education say that they feel pressured by this kind of education to become sexually active. Many teens actually say that they wish they had waited, but yet this sex education really pushes them and normalizes sex at a very young age.
So Monica, you were dealing with a lot of young kids, 12, 13-year-olds, and they asked you a lot of questions. What kind of questions were they asking you, and what was Planned Parenthood encouraging you to respond?
So I think one of the stories that affects me even today the most is a 13-year-old girl at an alternative school in East Austin. And I was there to teach them on HIV prevention. And, her question, and I'll clean up the question for you on the radio here,
Please.
but she basically asked me, I'll clean it up, but you'll use her imagination. But she did say, she asked me it was a very normal question, no laughing or anything. And she just said, okay, so when I'm involved in this particular sexual activity with a boy, I gag. Teach me how to do it better. Now, that really shocked me, and it took me back, and it made me really feel bad for this little girl. And so I decided that instead of talking to her at that first moment about prevention and bodily fluids and such, I wanted to really address her behavior. And so I asked her, I reframed the question, and I said, okay, what I hear you asking me is that when you're involved in this activity, it makes you respond this way, and you don't like it. She said, that's right, I don't like it, but if you teach me how to do it better, perhaps I will. And I said, well, have you considered, first of all, that you don't have to do the thing that you don't like? And at that point, all of the kids, this was boys and girls, 13 to 14 years of age, turned around in their chairs and gave me their full attention. And I could tell by the way they were looking at me, they were not shamed the way Planned Parenthood said that they would feel shamed by me suggesting for them not to do it. They actually looked innocent.
Wow. Well, Monica, I'm sorry we have to run. This is Monica Klein, former Planned Parenthood trained sexual health education instructor. Well, you have been watching as the international community is outraged by the situation in the Amazon, where supposedly a vast bevy of fires are being set. People are suggesting that this is at the behest of Bolsonaro, who is the leader of Brazil. It turns out that this is not super true, that a lot of the fires that are being set are actually being set on ground that was already agricultural, that it wasn't people just burning down forest. No mind, never matter. The bottom line is that the Europeans basically decided that it was time to crack down on Brazil and punish them. The problem is that this is not really thinking the problem all the way through. If you actually wish to preserve the environment, you have to take all the factors into consideration. Joining us on the line to discuss is Henry Olsen. He's a Washington Post columnist, a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Henry, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
So let's talk about what exactly is happening in the Amazon. It appears that a lot of the initial reports about the fires in the Amazon were greatly exaggerated. We are not talking about record levels of fire in the Amazon. We're talking about an increase over the last year, but a level of fires that is sort of well within kind of normal boundaries over the last 10 years, correct?
That's what I understand. And the fact is there's still massive amounts of rainforest, even if all of these fires were left to burn unchecked. The Amazon is so huge that even an increase in the number of fires and clearings still leaves a huge rainforest.
And with all of that said, the international community went nuts. They suggested that this is all because Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, is engaged in some sort of grand campaign to wreck the environment. Now, you point out in your column over at the Washington Post that it's very easy to virtue signal about this sort of stuff. It's a lot more difficult to talk about solutions for what's happening in the Amazon. Why is that? Why isn't it that we can just sanction Brazil or something and then they will stop doing what they are doing?
Well, look, the reason the Brazilians are doing this is because Brazil is a poor country, especially compared to Europe and the United States. And they need land for development. They need land for farming, and they need land for mineral resource exploitation. And virtue signaling is cheap for the Europeans, but what that means is that there are millions of Brazilians who will be locked in what they would generally consider to be poverty or near poverty. And there's not enough money in the world for the Europeans to actually change that equation.
So what exactly would be the best solution for all of this? It seems as though a lot of the environmentalist programs that we see are dedicated toward actually keeping the level of living lower in a lot of the developing world, lowering it in the developed world for sure, but also quashing the ability of the developing world to grow faster and use more efficient methods of fuel because those also tend to pollute more. You sort of make the case that if you would like to see the environment preserved, you need to make countries richer.
That's absolutely right. That the reason you take a look at who's emitting right now, China alone emits more greenhouse gases than Europe and the United States combined. And China's not going to stop developing. It's not going to stop growing at 6, 7, 8% a year. And that means its greenhouse gas emissions are going to go up, not down. The only way to solve this problem is to create new technology that allows you to grow without emitting as many gases. And that means high storage batteries, that solar power stops being a niche product. And it means other things so that there's not this war between saving the planet, according to the Europeans, and enriching your lives, according to the developed world. It needs to be a win-win, or else you're never going to be able to get anywhere.
Now, Henry, it seems like the same thing should hold true in the developed world as well. When you apply it to broader questions of climate change, it's funny. Whenever you hear from folks on the left about climate change, first of all, they always provide you with these sort of black swan estimates of what climate change will amount to. All of the cities underwater, or vast diseases uncovered as woolly mammoths are suddenly exposed by global warming to the sunlight. This is the thing that AOC was pushing a little bit earlier this week. But the fact is that the energy resources that are currently available are certainly not of the caliber necessary to replace carbon-based emission systems. And it is also true that, as you say, China and the rest of the developing world is going to continue emitting even if the United States were to place carbon taxes on itself at exorbitant rates.
That's right. I mean, one of the things that the climate control groupies talk about is carbon-adjusted border fees, which is simply green tariffs in order to keep competition from China and other countries from swamping American or European-produced goods. And there's no way to have a climate control policy that doesn't make someone poorer with existing technology. You put on carbon taxes, that means big families pay more. It means people with big houses pay more. It means people in rural areas pay more because they have to drive farther to jobs. It means people in fossil fuel extraction probably lose their jobs. And then again, there's not going to be an amount of politically sustainable compensation that will save these people from having their standard of living destroyed or decline.
Now, what's funny about this is that it almost seems to boil down whenever we have these environmental conversations. We always seem to come back to the old Julian Simon versus Paul Ehrlich debate over whether human ingenuity is actually going to get us out of this. And environmentalists seem to be stuck in this continuing loop of arguing that this finally will be the time when human ingenuity is exhausted and we're all going to die. And people who have looked at the history of technological development instead are saying, well, why aren't we looking at adaptation? Why aren't we looking at mitigation? Why aren't we looking at technological development? Aren't there pretty solid indicators that technologies are being developed as we speak that are going to both be more energy efficient in a cleaner way and also that are going to be able to help us deal with climate change on a broad level? I mean, we have obvious mitigation efforts like building seawalls, but also geoengineering. There are new machines that are being invented to suck carbon out of the air. In other words, why is it that so many on the left seem unwilling to bank on the possibility of human technology helping all of us when the truth is that the human economy is going to grow by leaps and bounds from here to 2100?
Yeah, there are lots of technologies that are being developed. And some of them require or benefit from government subsidy. But the fact is, as solar panels are becoming more efficient, batteries to store solar power are becoming more efficient, wind turbines are becoming more efficient, and we're finding more efficient ways to generate electricity. It's a massive technological project, but it's happening, and it could happen faster with government support. But the fact is, human ingenuity is solving the problem. And the other thing is that there's just no politically sustainable way to do it any other way. You know, you've got a liberal state like Washington that has twice in the last 2 elections rejected a modest carbon tax. If Washington state won't agree to a modest carbon tax to fight climate change, what possible ability do you think that AOC's grand Green New Deal has of passing Congress?
We're speaking with Henry Olsen, Washington Post columnist. Henry, I want to switch topics for a second and ask you about a column that you wrote a couple of days ago about the situation with Brexit. You are encouraging Prime Minister Boris Johnson to continue forward with a no-deal Brexit if need be. How do you see the situation shaping up in Britain? Do you think a no-deal Brexit is the most likely outcome at this point?
Well, I think it's the most likely outcome, in part because all of the people who don't like Brexit haven't yet agreed on an alternative. That to be serious about a no-deal Brexit, what they have to do is have an alternative government and probably repeal Article 50, which is what is a law that Parliament passed 2 years ago that says that Britain is leaving the European Union, and there's no stomach for that. So I think Boris Johnson is the courageous, spirited leader that Britain's Brexit forces have needed for years, and he's going to see this through, and I think he's going to win.
What do you make of this bizarre complaint that we're seeing from the European left, from many in the United States, that Johnson is somehow radically undermining British democracy by obeying the mandate of the British people in a democratic election and then briefly proroguing Parliament like 5 days early, that this was the case in point of dictatorial powers occurring?
Yeah, I mean, somebody pointed out today that former British Prime Minister John Major, who's joining forces to, allegedly stop Boris Johnson, prorogued Parliament twice, or prorogued Parliament in 1997 to avoid an investigation into various scandals. The European and international left have been using the idea that the right is against democracy when what they're really doing is saying we're losing and we're upset. I mean, Israel's election, I follow Israel pretty closely, and the New York Times of Israel can't get through a day or two without having if Netanyahu is reelected, Israeli democracy is destroyed. Really? Really? Last time I checked, there's a free press, free elections, low burden of entry into politics.
I mean, Henry, they can't stop holding elections over there.
Democracy.
They can't stop holding elections over there, for God's sake. I mean,
right.
Israeli democracy is in trouble. They keep holding elections every 4 months. I mean, that's insane. But you're right. There is this push on the part of the radical left and increasingly mainstream liberals to claim that anything they don't like is a dramatic threat to democracy, even when it is working according to normal democratic means. Meanwhile, you see people on the left routinely attacking the institutions of democracy. I mean, here in the United States at home, we keep hearing that the Trump administration is a threat to democracy, that it's overriding all checks and balances. And at the same time, the same people are saying we should get rid of the Electoral College, that the Senate is not representative of population, so it's an anti-democratic institution. Jamel Bouie wrote in the New York Times recently that that pure majoritarianism would be the best possible solution to America's problems. And yet we're hearing that it is the folks on the conservative side of the aisle working within checks and balances who are a threat to the democracy.
Well, pure majoritarianism, except when they would lose the election. I mean, Take a look at how many things the Supreme Court, controlled by the left, has taken away from Democrats over the last 50 years. So basically, it's a heads I win, tails you lose argument about democracy, and that dog don't hunt.
Henry Olsen, Washington Post columnist. Really appreciate your time, Henry. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Well, in just a second, we're going to talk about the left not being able to actually live by its own policies, because this is one of the other amazing things about so many on the American left, is they purport to be kind and gentle and wonderful and purport to have certain values when it comes to equality of outcome. And then when it comes to their town, they're like, let's not do that. Okay, so New York having a SAD. It turns out that Maplewood, New Jersey, has a big SAD. Why? Well, according to the New York Times, a suburb believed in liberal ideas. Then came a new busing plan. SAD trombone. Boo, 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 boo. According to Kamiko de Freitas Tamura, the reporter for the New York Times, this suburb, with its high-performing schools, seems a haven of diversity and progressiveness. Signs that trumpet stigma-free town and hate has no home here. hang from lampposts. And after a series of fatal police shootings across the country, Black Lives Matter placards popped up on lawns. But now, a strategy to tackle racial inequity in the school district is challenging the town's self-image, casting a harsh light on segregation and the stark achievement gaps between black and white students, and raising pointed questions about race and class. In the district that serves Maplewood and its neighbor, South Orange, the plan is to eliminate guaranteed seats in neighborhood elementary schools, bus children to other buildings, and reduce the grouping of students by test scores, which has resulted in white students filling a disproportionate share of higher-level classes. Though children of all backgrounds would be bused, a significant number would likely be white because of school enrollment trends. Joanna Wright, a member of the district's Board of Education, said the clear racial disparities in the system should make everyone feel the need to respond. She says there can be no more lying about the racism that infects public education in our school district. Whenever people say the racism that infects, it's like, okay, who's the racist? Which policy is the racist policy? What's the legacy of racism that is borne out here? And how can it be alleviated without applying racist judgments about entire groups of people? No answers? No? While the district is generally considered high-performing based on measurements like standardized test scores and the number of high school grads bound for college, there are major differences between white students and black students. The school district has, as far back as the 1960s, made efforts to racially integrate its schools, including using busing. But critics say some of the schools have struggled to achieve the ultimate goal of full integration. Because some of the schools participated in busing and some did not, black students in the district are on average academically 3 grades behind their white peers and 5 times likelier to be suspended than white students, according to an analysis in 2017 by ProPublica. On state tests in math and language arts, black students lag behind their white classmates in all 7 elementary schools. Clearly, this is the fault of buses, so we need to send white students to black schools to make sure that we integrate the whole system. We have to ensure that we have the proper racial mix, the proper representative racial mix, and we certainly cannot group students in classes by their test scores. This would be racist. And parents are scared of talking about this because they're afraid of being labeled racist for saying, I don't want my kid going to a worse school. No. And also, we don't think it's going to solve the underlying educational problems and educational disparities by putting my kid on a bus to a school with kids who are underperforming. One parent, Elizabeth Payne, said, they're not putting kids first at all. I don't think shipping them across town to another school is going to help. Well, yes, but apparently this has only occurred to folks on the left once it hit home to them that it meant taking their own kids and putting them in worse schools to achieve equality of outcome rather than better opportunity for everybody, which is what we really should be focusing in on. Well, it's a Friday, and every Friday at this time, we do something that we like to call Uncle Ben's SJW Storytime. What that is we examine a children's book. Some of them are old and do not have proper woke messaging. And we have to make sure that you don't read these books to your children. And some are super woke and wonderful. And these are the ones that we like to uphold so that you know how to indoctrinate your children in woke, beautiful, intersectional, gender non-specific ideas. And this brings us to today's version of Uncle Ben's SJW Storytime. Today, we read Jacob's New Dress by Sarah and Ian Hoffman. Ah, yes, because Sarah has to wear a dress, and his parents are not going to put their preconceptions about gender on a 5-year-old. They're just going to let him run around naked if he wants and like crap on the floor and such. Jacob ran to join Emily in the dress-up corner. Emily slid into a shiny yellow dress while Jacob wiggled into a sparkly pink dress. They both reached for the crown, but Jacob got there first. I'll be the princess, he said. Christopher frowned. Jacob, why do you always wear the girl clothes? Put on the knight armor. That's what the boy wears. Christopher, stop telling us what to do, said Emily. Miss Wilson heard the hubbub. Ms. Wilson, sorry. What's going on, kids? Jacob is wearing girl clothes, complained Christopher. True. Fact check, true. The dress-up corner is where we come to use our imaginations, Miss Wilson said. You can be a dinosaur, a princess, a farmer, anything. Christopher, what do you want to be? A boy. Christopher scowled. All right, Christopher. All right, fair enough, man. Miss Wilson smiled. Jacob, you try it. What new thing could you imagine being? A firefighter, a policeman? Miss Wilson, Jacob said proudly, I'm the princess. How was school today, Mom asked, studying Jacob's face. Fun? Christopher says boys can't wear dresses, said Jacob. Can they? Of course they can. Mom hugged Jacob. Why don't you get the dress you wore on Halloween and play in that? Or alternatively, Mom could explain the consequences of wearing dresses for boys, namely social ostracization, people making fun of you, reinforcement of the idea that you are somehow not normal. Now, you may not like any of those things as what society does, but those are things that society does. And society tends to do that because there are valuable distinctions between the sexes. That doesn't mean you should make fun of other kids, obviously. But Jacob's mom kind of dumb. She should explain the consequences of doing this. Jacob pulled on his witch's dress and twirled. He loved the way the black lace swirled around him. I want to wear my dress to school. Jacob's mom frowned. I don't think so, she said. That's for dress up at home. It would get dirty at school. Then can I get a regular dress, a dress I can wear to school? Mom was quiet. Let me think about that, she said. See, this is where mom should be like, no. No. Sorry, no. I'm the parent. I know what's best for you. If when you get older you decide that cross-dressing is your thing, then by all means go for it. But while you're here, I know the consequences of this. I know that environment helps shape your future behavior, and I'm not particularly comfortable with a 5-year-old making decisions they don't understand. How about that? Just like I wouldn't let my kid go to school in PJs or naked, you don't get to go to school in the garb of the opposite sex. Right? No, not Jacob's mom. Jacob's mom, she's woke. Solid stuff. Jacob apparently stood on the stairs wrapped in a giant bath towel, and mom said, what is that? Jacob said, it's like a dress, but I can get it dirty. I made it. Dad frowned because Dad is the only sensible person left in the house. He said, you can't go to school like that. Mom just trumps Dad because she doesn't care about what she looks like with her husband in front of the kids. She says, put on some shorts and a shirt under that dress thing. Hurry, we're late for school. Just ignore Dad. Solid parenting, Mom. What's that? Demanded Christopher. Jacob moved closer to his mom. Good morning, Christopher, said Jacob's mom. Jacob's wearing something new he invented. Isn't it nice? Christopher didn't answer. Because no, it wasn't nice. He's wearing a towel. I want a dress like that, cried Emily. Where'd you get it? It's not a dress, said Jacob. It's a dress thing. The playground was full of laughter and running feet as the children played tag. Then, Christopher is mean. I'm gonna summarize the story a little bit because it's long. Christopher is mean. And so Jacob goes back home to mom and says, Christopher is not always nice to me. And that's when mom decides to sew Jacob a full dress that he can wear to school. Let's get the sewing machine, she said. Jacob felt the air refill his body. He grinned. Mom smiled back. There are all sorts of ways to be a boy, she said, right? Turning your child into a gender warrior at age 5. Obviously the best way to raise a kid. Dad looked up from his book. Mom and I made a dress, said Jacob quietly. Dad studied the dress. Jacob started to get that can't breathe feeling again. I can see you worked hard on that dress, said Dad. Are you sure you want to wear it to school? Jacob nodded. Dad nodded back and smiled. Well, it's not what I would wear, but you look great. See, at no point in this entire book does anyone explain to Jacob why boys and girls tend to dress differently cross-culturally, why it is that boys and girls are different, what are the social consequences of wearing a dress to school. At no point is this discussed anywhere. It's just he wants to do it, we won't explain the consequences, go enjoy. Right, so anyway, Jacob ends up going to school. Everybody has a wonderful time. On the playground, Christopher yelled, let's play tag, boys versus girls. Jacob, you're on the girls' team. A bunch of kids laughed. Jacob felt his dress surrounding him, like armor, soft, cottony, magic armor. So you see, it's a fantasy, this book. Because guess what actually happens to kids when they are socially ostracized? They don't feel soft, cottony armor around them. This doesn't mean that Jacob should be bullied at school. It does mean that mom and dad putting a kid in a position to be bullied is not a smart thing to do as parents. But it is a woke thing to do as parents. And Jacob ends up super happy, ostracized, running around town in a dress. Well done, everyone. Jacob's new dress. What a beautiful book. You know, as a parent, your job is to be a parent, which means protecting your kid's innocence. It does not mean that you're supposed to put your kid in a position that makes their life legitimately harder for your own feelings of gender wokeness. What absolute silliness. Alrighty, we'll be back here next week, and we will see you then. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.